I go back a long way with my guest today. We met in 1981 or 1982 when I was attending Wilfrid Laurier University. I was in the business program and was taking a Canadian history elective. He happened to be the teaching assistant in the program. We both had an interest in politics and the local political scene. He spent the summer of 1982 working for the Justice Minister, Mark McGuigan. I followed in the same position in 1983. We've stayed in contact at various times over the years. Our paths crossed a little more intensely when I was a regional councillor and he was the Director of Corporate Communications at the Region of Waterloo, a position he held from 2000 to his recent retirement in 2020. He sent me a copy of his resume for today's show. He was a municipal councillor for the City of Kitchener from 1988 to 1994 and regional councillor. He's worked for provincial and federal politicians. He's worked in private industry as a consultant. He worked for a local school board. He's worked for a local university. He started and ran a newspaper called Kitchener This Week. My initial observations from all of that: first, he has to be the most well-rounded political operative in Waterloo Region. And second, he really has been paid by every level of government, even by the Fourth Estate in his life. We will always have some good discussions and good laughs when we get together. And I'm pleased to welcome my friend, my recently retired friend, Bryan Stortz, to the Old Grey Mayors podcast. So, Bryan, welcome.
Thanks, Rob. That was quite an introduction. I appreciate that.
I understand you're the best director of communications that the Region of Waterloo's ever had until the new appointment.
Exactly. Yeah, that was at least the longest serving. Yeah, I'm also the worst, but or at least until they appointed TJ as my acting. But yeah, no, it was a good. It was a great run at the Region of Waterloo.
That was were you the first director of communications?
Yeah, when I went there, the title, I was hired as EA to the CAO, and then once I'd been there about a year or two, they basically redid the position to be the director of corporate communications. So that was my thing. But before we get going into me, Rob, I'm actually quite prepared for you because given the fact that we've known each other for probably about 40 years, I've got actually a few Rob Deutschman fun facts here. So before you move forward, I certainly want to give your loyal listeners a few facts that they may not know about your illustrious career.
I got an image here, eh? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was in 1980. It was it was about 40 years ago that you were a student of Jerry Stortz, Professor Jerry Stortz, and I was his TA. So that sort of stretches the field a little bit there. And I recall very vividly that you were part of a really bright group of students that came out of St. Jerome's High School. And your colleague, you were there with Mike Gazzola and Pete Eichinger, and Eichen Deutsch, a notorious Gaz, yeah, exactly.
Who is John Gazzola's son?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was impressed, on a serious note, that when you're dealing with first year students that came out of St. Jerome's, like yourselves, could write sentences, could write paragraphs, could create a cohesive argument. So again, you certainly your pedigree from St. Jerome certainly served you well. I don't know if everyone knows that you were a varsity hockey player. And,
I pined it for 2 years.
Yeah, well, and I think at that time, out of whatever loyalty, I remember going to one of your games, and my recollection was that you were a very skilled hockey player, but you were just too much of a nice guy for the elbows up, which maybe you changed a bit when you went into law, but I remember that you were a skilled, but a very, I remember you probably smiled too much on the ice.
Tell that to my Sunday night hockey guys. They got the opposite view.
Yeah. You were president of the Ontario New Liberals for a year, and I recall the day you were elected and how that went that day. So we'll leave that there. And you were a summer student in our
A little
office.
hungover.
Little hungover. And remember, and when I worked for McGuigan actually at External Affairs in '82, and then at Justice in '83, and that's when you and another a prominent lawyer, George Dietrich,
Yep.
were summer students. And I recall your behavior at an event in Hull with Princess Diana and
Chuck and Die.
Chuck and Die, and maybe that we'll leave that one for another.
Let me just say, the EA for McGuigan said we can't afford to have two more Yahoos on the Hill after that event.
Yeah, and I recall it was my idea to bring you to Ottawa, and I think unfortunately I was held to blame for your.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that.
For your antics. I've got a longer list here, which I might.
Yeah, hey, this show is not. People are tired of what you're saying already, so let's move on.
Yeah, and but no, it's been again we've been great friends for many years.
Oh, and, I mean, the political ties go deep, and it's always fun to go over some of the stories. And I know you have to be, as I know one listener will want to make sure you'll be a little bit circumspect in your comments today, and we know who that is.
Yeah, we'll leave it there.
But I just wanted to say, I was thinking it was kind of curious because we met in a history class and we're talking about history. And now here you and I are 40 years later, and we're talking about history that we're kind of in different ways part of. So it's kind of like we're a couple of old dudes here now, man. Yeah.
No, it's well. I'm gray. I do fit the old gray part of the criteria. You actually managed to remain relatively youthful.
Whatever I have left. Listen, and you could easily have been a mayor based on this resume anywhere you wanted to be, but I know you're too modest a guy to always want to be out in the forefront, and you're more working the back rooms, and you do an excellent job of it too from a political perspective. I mean, you're a formidable political operative in this community. So, but I like the idea of bringing you on, and I was waiting for you to retire because, I know how you would be if you were still working and really couldn't say much because it's always walking on eggshells. But I know you're not going to say a ton now, but at least be a little bit more open about things. And I thought it was good for the listeners because this show is all about trying to understand not only the history of what's been happening in Waterloo region, and again, I like Mike Maurice described it the other day as an informal historical account of what's been going on. And that's sort of like a meandering that we do. But I want the people that listen to understand what's going on, because advocacy in the community is so important. Grassroots advocacy is so important to make the politicians do stuff. I started my political career, if you say at North Dumfries, advocating for a community center, and what I went through with respect to that had some good lessons. And as a politician, and you see it too, when people come to councils advocating for something, you always often think, okay, how could they maybe do that a little bit differently or more effectively to get what they need? And so through our stories, we hope that they're able to learn a little bit. But I just want to talk about also, of course, history. And I mentioned that you were a city councillor for the city of Kitchener, but you were also on regional council. Were you double direct, like on regional council, double elect, I should say, for the whole time?
No, well, I was elected to Kitchener Council in '88, but was elected to regional council, or was elected by my peers on Kitchener Council in '91. So I spent 3 years as a double direct elect to the region.
Because it was interesting where here in the region and the municipalities, we went through this discussion about whether we were going to change the election format. And I know in talking to Ken Sealing about this in the past and on the show, we've touched on this issue, and it was always important to him to have a direct elect councillor versus the double direct or double elect, where it was someone who was both on the local council and the regional council. What was your thoughts on that issue?
Well, all I can do is reflect on what it was like in the 91 to 94 period. And I think at that point in time, the double direct model probably worked. And I think that, some people or some councillors were parochial and really came with their city or township hat on and took those positions. I would like to think that I and others, took the broader view. But at that time too, and this is sort of more of a philosophical discussion, the region of Waterloo was a much different organization. and
Right.
the services that the region provided were very different. Essentially, at that point in time, the region was a wholesaler of services. We ran the landfill, water and wastewater, and so on. So there were, macro planning at the sort of more at the policy level. The cities did zone changes and stuff like that. So it was a different role. And I think, again, it might maybe have fun with Ken and I on together at some point. We can debate this, but
Yeah.
I think in 2000, when all the major services moved to the region, and around that time when they revisited the way of electing councillors, I think it suited the times.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because there's more services at the regional level, and you want that more direct elected councillor to regional council in that situation.
Yeah. So again, it's a philosophical discussion, but I think at the time, I mean, and we can talk a bit about this too, and maybe this is where you're going with the planning discussion.
Don't wonder where I'm going.
Okay, I know where you're going. Yeah, but the at the end of the day, I recall I was vice chair of planning from 91 to 94, and had a role in the 1994 ROP update. And
ROP, just for everyone, that's ROP. What does it stand for?
Regional Official Plan. Sorry, I'll try to stay away from acronyms. So
it's okay, you can call it ROP now. We've just explained it.
Yeah. So when we did the update, and it was more of an update. It wasn't as sort of large as some of the more recent reviews of the official plan, but it did do things like set urban boundaries and some of those key things. And at that point in time, even before we had trains and so on, we were very much trying to direct and shape where growth went, in large part to accommodate servicing and both for service.
I just want to stop you for a second. I want to just go back to you. So you're elected as a councillor. You do your 3 years. Now you've been there long enough for the people around the city of Kitchener and Horseshoe to say, okay, you'll be one of how many representatives to regional council?
At that time, there were 23 councillors, so it was a larger.
Kitchener in the city of Kitchener?
No. Sorry, 23 overall. Kitchener sent the mayor and 8 councillors. So
8 councillors.
8 from Kitchener.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the structure then, because again it was a larger council. I think it was under Harris that they reduced the number to something approximately as to where they are today.
Right. So when you went as one of the 8, you got appointed as the vice chair of planning?
Yeah, I guess there was a pre-inaugural discussion, and for whatever reason, I was asked to take on that role. And I'd been involved with planning at the city of Kitchener, so I don't know what the rationale was. But the other good thing was that being vice chair of chair of the chairs and vice chairs of standing committees also formed the finance committee. Yeah. And back then we had 4 standing committees, and again and being on finance was great. I think was a good role to be in. And at that time too, like right now, and this is sort of inside baseball stuff, but right now regional council functions as committee of the whole. So all the councillors sit on all the standing committees. Yeah. Back then, everybody kind of divided up because you had, again, more councillors. Everybody wanted to be on engineering because that's where all the fun happened with roads and services and so on.
So now everybody's on planning, everybody's on finance, everybody's on social services. I always thought that was odd because then you had committee of the whole. So then you voted about it once and then you voted again. It was all the same people. So it took me a while because I was kind of new to all that to get the handle on that.
Yeah, and I mean, what it does for the region today with the committee of the whole system is that usually, and it may change over time, but the committee days are the heavy lifting days. So that's when delegations generally appear. Right. That's when, well, you know this, you were there, but that's where the deeper dive into issues takes place. And then usually when it comes to full council on the Wednesday meeting, usually if it wasn't a closed vote or if it was a very clear indication, and then it usually goes through. But but the heavy lifting has been, and maybe as it should be, because then you do have the time to spend,
Sure.
the time to really delve into the issues. You've had former Chair Ken Sealy on here a couple times, and Ken's really the guy who has the encyclopedic knowledge of
Yeah, no, I know.
of that period. But really, it was it was an interesting role, an interesting time. But it was really once we hit the and when I came back, sort of coincidentally, when I came back as a staff person, that again, all those services came to the region, transit.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a sec.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
back to 95, like with the planning, I want to get to, because this is sort of touches on the ION, a really early iteration or concept of the ION. And maybe you could talk about that.
Well, the Central Transit Corridor had been in the official plan since 1976. And so there had been a protected corridor running sort of north-south, connecting essentially, I think it went right up to Elmira, but connecting to downtown Galt through that period of time. My recollection was that it was more of a conceptual line rather than a fixed line, because obviously we've made differences or changes to the alignment over the through the through the process for both stage 1 and stage 2 of ION. But that was sort of, that was embedded, but that really wasn't a high profile part of it at that point in time. I think it was just accepted. It was one of those, many components of the plan. But at that point in time, the bigger thing was protecting the urban boundary, even then. And I recall a spirited discussion with my friend, the late Jane Brewer, when she was Mayor Brewer, over some lands on the west side, and Jane, I think obviously she was doing what Cambridge wanted, but she was also one of the least parochial elected officials. So I remember having a spirited debate with her during that period. But at the end of the day, I think we ended up in a good place. And I think with the involvement of staff and with council today, even at that point in time, I think there was integrity to the plan.
And on Jane, during my time on council, when she was there, I found her to be very regional focused on the issues. And I really enjoyed listening to her and getting some guidance from her too.
Yeah, no, and the other thing is that in the later years when you were on council, she was getting a little older. But when I was on council with her, she was in her prime, and when she was in her prime, she was
been there for that.
Oh yeah, no, she was a force to be reckoned with. But again,
like Claudette Miller.
Yeah, I knew Claudette when she was mayor back when I was on the Hill back in the early '80s, because we used to go to her for direction on capital projects. But yeah, she's Claudette. She was.
They had some strong women.
Exactly.
Powerful women.
I'll leave it there.
Yes, role models.
Yeah.
But so you're on planning though. So you've got this central corridor, which is a concept, but it's there. It's a protected concept to be developed. You looked at something when you were vice chair in the mid '90s. Some ideas. So you're talking about the convention center idea.
Okay, I think we can probably pick that up when we talk about the ION, but that was actually part of the original proposal for ION. So that's a few years later. Sorry, Robert, I don't want to mess things up, but that came in 2002.
Okay, all right. So 2002, this concept. Okay, so when you're on planning, then there weren't any discussions about subway concepts, or that was later on?
Yeah, that came through the EA or the TPA process later on.
Gotcha. So your main focus while you were there was protecting the countryside boundaries, those sorts of things. What was your main focus?
Well, I think my main focus was just making sure that the process, the official plan process, went through with that we got the plan through intact. Lucille Bish was the planner in charge of that area. She was, again, very skilled, and we had good data to support our decisions. We had actually something that was probably way ahead of its time called the what if model. And they had a computer model that if you added population, or if you added certain variables to it, it would actually show you the future of the region. It was a predictive model.
Oh,
wow. And that model helped us. That was one of the tools we had when we went through that official plan process.
Interesting. So it would show you what like suburban sprawl would look like if you added a certain number of people to the community.
If you had a density and if you changed certain planning assumptions and so on. Again, that was a few years ago. My memory is just a little rusty, but it was
Right.
but we had this tool that that really helped us a lot. But I also think too that philosophically the underpinnings of where we are today was reinforced at that point in time. A lot of it was, like, again, it was accepted that we're not a community that is going to sprawl for the sake of sprawling. We're going to very much protect the valuable farmland that's around here. We're going to take care of or use existing infrastructure. I think those
Right.
concepts have always been sacrosanct.
And that's a big argument. That's a big positive argument, an economic argument, when you're saying making better use of existing infrastructure.
Well, yeah. When I was on Kitchener Council, and I was one of the more liberal councillors, and when I would debate some of my conservative councillors over tax increases and so on, at that point I said you could put, and we're seeing this actually today, you could put 10,000 units of housing in downtown Kitchener without adding without adding servicing as far as sewer, water, schools, and all that. It's already here. Whereas people who are again looking at a more of a developer builder sympathetic view of the world, all that had to be added, and so that sort of case that we were talking about, that again late 80s early 90s, is actually coming to bear right now. I live in downtown Kitchener. Have pretty well all my time since I've been here. We actually live on the site of the former Smiles and Chuckles factory in downtown Kitchener, and out of our bedroom window right now, I can see 8 cranes on a good day. It depends when, who's, like, some of them are up. So there are that many cranes on the skyline of downtown Kitchener alone. So I think some of those arguments that were around back in the late 80s, early 90s have really come forward. Like now in the 2020.
I've had Richard Christie on the show too to talk about stuff. And didn't you used to live in his home, or?
No, we were neighbors.
Okay, you're neighbors.
Yeah, we were.
Whose house did you have?
I lived. I know this is a trivia thing, but I lived in the house where the alderman who was on Kitchener Council when the name change took place in 1917 lived. His name was Debus. So, and then also I understand from a walking tour of Guide to the Neighborhood that Mackenzie King, as a young boy, lived in that place as well. So, so there should be a plaque on it that 2 former esteemed municipal leaders and a former future prime minister lived in that house. So,
did you just feel the spirits through Mackenzie King at all while you're there?
That may explain a lot.
So and side note, we could have been called Kitchener could have been called Corona in that day too if it had gone through. Okay, so let's speed up then. So you're not a whole lot, but like prior to 2000, you're working for the school board.
Yeah, I was the assistant to the director at the Catholic board, and I've been there for 4 years. Yeah. And
you got a call or something from the region?
I got a call from Jerry Thompson. I think it was in September, and it was Jerry's style to essentially recruit people that he wanted to. Like, Jerry had a steal list, and I was flattered to have been on that list. And Jerry phoned me up and asked if I'd be interested in, I guess, applying. I guess there was obviously a process to go to, but if I was interested in going to the region. And of course, again, a lot of exciting things were happening at that point in time, and I jumped at the opportunity.
But he wanted you for a specific purpose. Tell us what that was.
Well, at that time, and that's why I would say I'm distinctly unqualified for my current position, because that's what I wasn't hired for. But Jerry, at that point in time, had an optimistic view that there would be one-tier government locally, and all those services that we've talked about, whether it's waste collection, transit, paramedic services, housing. All those services had made the move to the region in the early part of 2000.
Late 90s, 2000?
Late 90s, yeah, 2000. So at that point in time, and Jerry, and again, I shouldn't be speaking for Jerry, but he's somebody else you might want to get on your show, because Jerry would love to talk. But at that point in time, Jerry, I think, was confident that that the momentum that had been evident earlier was going to continue, and there would be essentially, a one-tier system locally.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and so that I was always brought in to be, not sure what my role was going to be, whether I was going to, sort of lead or just be support. But he was creating a secretariat, or he had this vision of a secretariat that would oversee the creation of a one-tier system here. And of course, around the time that Jerry hired me and so on, suddenly all that momentum came to a complete grinding halt. But at the time that was the original role that I was being tapped for.
Yeah, so I know I've talked to Ken on previous shows about what was going on in the late 90s with Harris and the amalgamations, and sort of the A list of communities that did amalgamate, and then there was the B list, so to speak, that was looking at some services in terms of amalgamating or centralizing services. And then that all got shut down, so to speak, by the Conservative government. Was it because we were near an election or something, or what?
No, there wasn't an election until provincially until 2003. So I don't know.
Okay, so this was early on then. Okay.
Yeah. So there were the provincial elections. There was one in 1999, and there was one in 2003. So I don't know if the politics of the provincial politics were necessarily a factor, and so again, somebody like Ken's a much better person to speculate or hint or whatever Ken does on who made those decisions.
Sure. But it was interesting though when chatting with Ken about what was going on in the community. Wasn't it John Sweeney had done a report on this issue earlier in the 90s?
Yeah, there was the Sweeney review, and in the 90s, and it's interesting because I have to go back and get my memory refreshed on when that concluded. Because I remember when I was at Kitchener This Week in 95, 96, I think doing an editorial and doing, cartoons and stuff, lamenting the fact that the vision or the reforms that John Sweeney, supported by Brian Isaac, another great civil servant, were putting forward. And I think that was in the mid. Yeah, again, I don't have those dates at my fingertips.
Yeah, no, but Sweeney didn't come through, and then but eventually some services did come to the region after all of that, right? And so I guess you're Jerry Thompson, and I will reach out to him. He must have felt that the momentum from all of that seemed to lead to what he thought might be the inevitable conclusion of one-tier government.
Yeah, and again, I don't know when things kind of came to a grinding halt, but I think that might have been like mid to late part of 2000. But but again, that was one of the time when and Jerry was always the optimist that he felt that there was so much momentum that it would continue. But
he strongly felt that like the townships, the cities were all going to come to agreement about one-tier government.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I defer to others on that one. At that point in time, I went from working in education and dealing with all the Harris changes in that point in time to becoming a humble civil servant at the region of Waterloo. So my ability to have having lots of opinions on that were somewhat constrained.
Yeah, no, I'm no opinions, observations.
But,
so now you're there in 2000, and let's talk a little bit about ION then and LRT. So what is it then now? You've kind of shifted because you're there initially for an amalgamation or one-tier government, and now you're focused. You moved into this director of corporate communication position.
Yeah, and that sort of evolved over that period of time. But the sort of the tale of what happened was that Jerry and Graham Vincent and other folks, Wanda Richards and so on, were sequestered in Ken's boardroom. In Jerry's boardroom, that long table, if you recall, with maps, strewn across it, and they were drawing lines on this map and sketching out this vision for a light rail system for Waterloo region. Again, but it's focusing on the northern part of it. so all that work was being done, and I was involved with that and watching it all happen. Then what happened was so then the criteria at that point in time, again, remember we had a federal liberal government at that point in time. Jean Chrétien was prime minister, Paul Martin was finance minister, and the funding, the program of the day, there was funding available at that point, or at least it appeared to be. We had lots of times where we thought there was funding and there wasn't. But the original plan, and again, I'm going on memory, but the line went from Benton Street in downtown Kitchener to the University of Waterloo. So it was a much smaller system.
So it went through the downtown of Kitchener.
Yeah.
Up to the University of Waterloo. Gotcha.
Yeah, it was a smaller system, and the price tag for that system, which I think shows how, I wouldn't say naive, but we were new at this. Nobody else was doing this. The price tag was $260 million.
But this was like what year? 2001, 2002.
2002. So what happened was they met and they came out and they said, well, package this up for us. So we started doing some work in-house, and unfortunately, the product that we had wasn't particularly compelling. So I tapped a very skilled local graphic designer, Eric Sweet, company Scribblers Club that we'd worked with, and Eric took straw and spun it into gold. And we created this really compelling case for funding for the project. Then I remember being really frustrated because Jerry and company kept dicking with it, changing it. So, and there was this deadline to get this to Ottawa to hand it off to the federal officials.
Hold on one sec. What was the program? What was the federal program?
Building Canada. They all have acronyms.
Or was there a specific criteria? It had to be a certain thing.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, it was a capital program at the time. Yeah. And the one thing that we talked about is that it had a component that sort of lent itself to having a convention center, which would have been at where the current School of Pharmacy is. But the tale is that so we worked on it right to the last minute, and they were leaving to go to Ottawa to present it, and we were literally running it off internally in our print shop right to the last minute. And Linda Zavarella from my staff and we have different opinions of doing the same thing, but we both did. But we literally handed the warm copies, like they were right off the printer. Everything was still warm in the window of the van as they headed off to Ottawa to present it. So that was the original. That's how tight it was that we handed it at the top of the ramp as they were about to turn onto Frederick Street. That's how tight it was.
But the concept though then was something going from Benton to the University of Waterloo, but it tied in a convention center.
Yeah. So that plan never, never made it.
I know, but I'm curious about it, right? I don't want to jump too far ahead. How big was this convention center going to be?
I don't know, big enough to. I'm not sure how but it was going to be substantial. There was a
located where?
At the corner of Victoria and King. Again, where the current, it was the Upton site, where currently the School of Pharmacy and the School of Medicine is on that site, right across from what I'd like to talk about at some point in time is the King Victoria Transit Hub, but it was right at that corner. But that was just, I think that's more of a footnote on the broader journey. Then when we started to evolve.
Hold on a sec. What if that funding came through?
Probably would have been the worst decision anybody ever made.
But we would have a transit from Benton to the University of Waterloo with a convention center, right?
Well, I think that we probably wouldn't have enough money to build it, but.
The convention center wasn't included in the cost?
No. The convention center was included as part of the 260 million. So yeah. Right. So I mean, these were early days, right? We were taking numbers from other municipalities like Calgary, and we looked at Portland, Oregon, and a bunch of different places. And I think at that time we felt those numbers were solid because that's what we knew at the time. But then what happened was so that didn't see the light of day, and the programs changed and so on. Then we went back to revisit it, and we added more length to it, and we started the program started to evolve. But I also want to do a shout out to I remember going to Ottawa in 2002 as part of the lobbying efforts of the region, and going up there with Mike Murray, who was then the Commissioner of Transportation and Environmental Services, and others. Doing the rounds in Ottawa. And I found a memo when I was cleaning up my office after 20 years of
Yes,
lots and lots of paper being stashed there. And
I'm
I had a
sure.
memo. I had a memo summarizing our day, and our one of our champions at that time was Karen Redmond. Karen was the
Ah, there
MP,
you
and
go.
Karen was
Full
very
circle, full
full circle.
circle.
Yeah. So Karen was one of our champions at that time, as was an individual who worked in the Prime Minister's office, the legislative assistant to the Prime Minister, a guy by the name of John Malloy. And so I remember at that time, because obviously we needed as many friends in Ottawa as we had. I remember saying,
Yeah.
well, I got this friend, he's from Kitchener, and he's a really great guy, and he's got a pretty important job in the Prime Minister's office, and we should use him. So John was actually what was very helpful at that time, as were other MPs, like Lynn Myers was around, Andrew Telegdi. Like we did have some folks that supported us.
Look, on that note, just as a quick aside, and John being helpful, why don't you tell us about the other time John was very helpful?
Oh, okay. I'm talking about Go Service.
Yeah, just throw that in for a sec. This is
okay. Yeah.
Side story.
Oh my God, you're jumping all over the place. I
told you it's a meandering. This is not a chronological discussion. If you can't handle it, we'll kick you off.
Well, Rob, I'm a historian by training, so I have to have everything has to sort of follow a logical sequence. But I'll obviously you weren't a very good student, so you're not staying on task here.
It's a litigator's job to throw the witness that they're cross-examining off once in a while by interjecting with a few other things. But anyway, tell us this thing about John. This is a good story.
No, just I can't remember when it was. But it might have been like 2010 or maybe after. I don't know exactly the date, but this was when Go Service was still being talked about here, and we obviously felt that everything was proceeding. I can probably do the dates as I talk. But
don't worry about the dates.
Yeah,
the idea people can fill in the time frame, but just it's the act that is important.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and John was so good at what he did at Queen's Park. He was just he did so much for this community. So we had heard from our staff that the folks at Ministry of Transportation had stopped working on the file to bring Go to Waterloo Region to Kitchener Waterloo.
How did they hear about that? How did that come about?
That our staff were working with them, and they heard that basically they'd stopped working on the file. That the file was effectively. I wouldn't say dead, but it wasn't being worked on, and the plans to bring Go here had effectively stopped. So we reached out to John Malloy, who was our MPP at the time. John was was quite mortified because he obviously was on the assumption that it was still a go, and he followed up with the then Transportation Minister of the day, Kathleen Wynne, who based on John's case. Reactivated the Go Service, the planning for Go Service to come here. So Malloy and Kathleen played a key role to reactivating that file, whereas at that point in time it had effectively been set aside.
Yeah, and just so you know, I've known Malloy longer than you. He and I met at high school at St. Jerome's back in '78 when he was the young Liberal membership secretary. He popped into the library one day with this list of names at the photocopier, and I said, "What's all that about?" And the rest is history. So
yeah, I've only known John since '81. So yeah, so you got me beat on that one.
I got you beat on that one.
Yeah.
So okay, so after the thing didn't pan out, just go on with the ION progress.
So there was, and I was looking at there was so many steps, and there's a terrific document. I don't know if you've seen it on our on the website called the ION Story. So there's a chronology there of what went on. So what went on over the next decade or so, because if you look at it from the sort of the concept in 2002 to starting service in 2019, 17 years passed. So wow. there was tons and tons of planning. So we did, we got money from the federal government to conduct technical studies and do the EA. We had all kinds of requirements to provide to various levels of government. We had to do a comprehensive business case. So there was lots and lots of work being done. But as that work was being done, we were also continuing to make the case for funding. So there was just. So in fact, it's a miracle that this project actually made it through the gauntlet, because there were so many times that if at any one of these junctures, if things had kind of, fallen apart, the odds of it
Well, let
being.
me ask you, okay, two things. Okay, I'm going to talk about funding as the second thing, but the first thing, some of the concepts that you had talked about or mentioned, underground, above ground. Why don't you just touch briefly on some of the concepts that were bandied about?
Well, we were doing I'm not sure it was the EA or the Transit Project Assessment. There was points when we evaluated technology, and at that point in time, based on sort of the way that environmental assessments are done in Ontario, that you have to go in with an open mind. So there was everything from bus rapid transit to subway to light rail. And there was one concept, and there was a local person who, is quite well known, was very adamant or passionate about something called Aerobus. And what Aerobus was effectively a string of ski lifts, or the towers that you'd have at a ski hill, that would have dotted the corridor, and the cars would be like ski lift cars, and they would come down, and you would have this would be like hydro towers running through the core of the area. So those were some of the concepts that I think had never been done in the world, or they were going to do it in like the Philippines or something. So those were the things, and we're obviously getting pressure from people to be innovative and so on, and that was probably maybe a little more innovative.
What about underground? What was the underground story?
No, I think the reality with Subway is incredibly expensive. And
Yes.
to have a subway system, and you're seeing that now in Toronto, when
Yes.
they're building a couple kilometers of subway for like $1 billion. That I think part of it, and again, I'm not a planner, but the screening would also look at the viability, and I think the idea of running a subway from north to south would have been in the probably the tens of billions of dollars, so that wasn't viable.
So, okay, we're going to talk about financing for a second, because you and I were chatting about this the other day. And I want to go back to your discussion with me about the research and technology park. And, our friends out there, like Mike Pereira, would probably be interested in this sort of story. And just tell me about that, because it leads to the strategy for the ION.
Yeah, well, the region took the lead in making the application to senior levels of government for the R&T park, the David Johnson R&T park in just I guess north of the University of Waterloo. So that was you needed to have an entity, a local government entity, make the application, and it made sense for the region to do it. So we did all the planning and coordinated the a lot of the sort of the logistics to get the application together. But what we ran into at that point in time, there was a provincial Conservative government. I believe it was Ernie Eves was the premier at the time, and Jim Flaherty was the finance minister, I think, at that time. And federally there was a Liberal government, and we were having a tough time. And I think in our world, you always want to see some sort of consensus and governments sort of be in unison, but sometimes it's hard to get that. It's hard to get them on the same page at the same time. Yep. So what we did at that point in time, because we were having trouble getting, we knew what the numbers were going to be, and we were fairly confident that it was a project that was worth supporting. So the strategy that we took at that point in time was a broken front approach, was get one of the partners to move first, or one of our funding partners to move first, and then hope that the other would follow suit shortly after. So in that, what's that? Yeah. So in that case, we made the case to the province. The province moved first. We had an announcement at the University of Waterloo, and I think actually Jim Flaherty came and made the announcement, and all was great. Then a week later, we got a call from the federal MP that they entered to Lady, and they wanted to have the same event at the same place for the same amount. And so we had two events about a week apart. And that's how we got the funding for the R&T park. But again, it was sort of something that we learned at the time, was that sometimes, again, when you're dealing with senior levels of government, you have to sort of take it, like getting them to agree sometimes is challenging, but getting them, getting one often helps you get the other. And that was the approach that we took for the funding for the park.
Sure, everyone's coy until they think they're not going to be an important person at the dance or something, and they want to jump in as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but that was actually early on, because Jerry was CAO at the time, and that was our approach again, back probably, 02, 03.
So for ION, then you must have felt you were at a point where you had enough information submitted and you should get confirmation on funding.
Yeah, well, as I said, the process to get to, a funding announcement or a funding commitment was a very long and arduous one. We had to, obviously submit a business case, and there was a whole bunch of reviewing it and all that. But we did get to the point where we had done our due diligence locally, and we were attempting to get our senior funders to make make a commitment. And again, it was deja vu. It was very similar to what we were going through with the R&T Park. And at that point in time, Mike Murray was CAO. Yeah. And Mike and I, we talked about it. And again, it would be ideal to have everybody on the same page at the same time. But we, again, got our provincial partners to make their commitment first, which was $300 million. And that was good. We had this fantastic event in the lobby of 150 Frederick Street, where then Transportation Minister Kathleen Wynne came, made the announcement to absolutely thunderous applause. It was, I still get goosebumps when I remember that day. It was just so electric, and that set the stage, and that sort of again set the stage for us talking to our federal partners. And again, I'm guessing on weeks right now, but about maybe like 6 weeks later or whatever, we get the phone call from the Prime Minister, or from the federal side, saying that the Prime Minister would like to come in and make a funding announcement. I think the federal contribution was an upset limit of 275 million or thereabouts.
Thereabouts, sure.
Yeah, but thereabouts, yeah. And so we had an event. So because again, we had success with the province. The feds came in shortly afterwards, and Prime Minister Harper made an announcement that essentially we got our maybe slightly more than 2/3 of the funding to move the project forward. And we had to find.
Where was his event?
Was that for Harper? Yeah. Oh, it was at what is now the Crown Plaza, and the event was it was a photo op of him getting off a GRT bus. Like the photo op was for him getting off a GRT bus in front of the Crown Plaza. So I was doing the event that day. I was organizing or coordinating it, and so we had a GRT bus tucked down Charles Street near EB or whatever along the side there, with the local MPs on it, and all the sort of all the local conservative MPs on the bus, and I was there kind of directing traffic or whatever, and the Harper motorcade pulls up, and I had the pleasure, because Harper was actually, I'm partisan, but I'm not that partisan. What was very gracious. So I was out greeting the Prime Minister, inviting him to come in and welcoming him to Kitchener, and the conservative MPs who knew who I was from my political days, they were just laughing so hard. They thought of all the people to greet the Prime Minister coming to Kitchener that day, it had to be me. But so it was good, but it reflected that we had a good relationship with with Harold.
To use the two-step gambit, we'll call it. Was there a problem getting the two of them to the table with funding prior to that, or?
No, but at the time, you're dealing with different programs at different levels of government with slightly nuanced funding mechanisms and so on. So it's you're even though technically they're kind of complementary, there's a million details that need to be that have to be worked out. So again, and a lot of it's just again deciding when to have it happen, and we were fortunate that it did.
So so we're at the 2010 election, municipal election, all right, and I know Ken is regional chair, he's getting some heat from people and stuff like that, but he wins and all of that. But my recollection when I'm running for mayor out in North Dumfries, and I was not even really aware of a lot of that stuff, because we weren't going to get tagged with any of the costs in the townships. Yep. But I had thought that the discussion during the election was sort of like, okay, well, we're not really going to be able to move ahead with this project because we didn't get the funding amounts that we had hoped to get. Is that right, or is there a variation of that?
There's a variation of that. I think the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 formula was pretty standard at that time.
Yeah.
So it was, I think, pretty clear that there would have to be a local contribution, and we had a strategy to provide that funding. So again, so that was something that we had talked about. So it wasn't like we're expecting two senior levels of government to pay for the whole thing. We our council were aware of it, but I think what happened was, and the reason it became so such a big issue during that election was that, yes, we got the funding from the province. Okay. And a lot of people hadn't taken the project seriously. A lot of people, said, okay, fine. These guys are tilting at windmills or whatever. And, so then suddenly, we get the announcement from the province. The prime minister comes in, makes the announcement, and everybody goes, holy shit, you're actually going to do this.
And that's you got to come up with 265 or whatever it is.
Yeah. So I think that was I think that was the reality. The reality of the project really hit home at that point in time, that we had to do it. Also, the fact too that money was being spent. This is a community that I was involved when we built Kitchener City Hall. I hear stories about Center in the Square. Like usually when in this, I stay in town, and if you spend more than $10,000, well, you've done this in North Dumfries. Every large capital project has controversy around it. Not everybody likes what you're doing and likes spending money. And this was the largest capital project in the history of Waterloo Region. So obviously it would attract some interest. So yeah, that's just the way that it is. There was a group that formed, and I was racking my brain this morning to remember who they were, but there was a columnist in the Record who kind of led it, and there was a few folks. So there was some organized opposition to the project, to it. But the one thing with it, and I was sort of again reflecting on this, is that in that election period, council wasn't being asked to make any decisions at that point in time. They were full into election mode. Yeah. What I'd like to do is sort of flash ahead to June 15th, 2011. Everybody gets elected. Ken was unwavering as a champion for the project. Other people, took a more measured approach during the election. And, I've been a candidate, you've been a candidate, that, sometimes you gotta, there's things you will and won't do during an election campaign. But when we came out of the campaign, the council was solidly behind it. And I think the one thing that I'll say is that when you look at other municipalities, whether it's, Hamilton or other places, where they get stalled is turnover on council, the lack of a common vision, the lack of continuity, and we had a very solid core of folks who supported it year over year. So we get to
the chairs of the committees were very strong, like Galloway, and Jim
Weidman,
Jim Weidman, right? Were very strong in support.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Well, Tom was chair of finance at the time, and Jim was the chair of planning and works. Jim was awesome. He chaired all those meetings. And the other thing too is that the meetings that we had, you were on council then, but you had a conflict.
Yeah, I did. Then Ken did, and then Tom initially did.
Yeah. But we had those public meetings or the council meetings where we had like 50, 60 delegations a night. Like they were really something else. Like there a very spirited debate took place at that time on whether we should or shouldn't move forward with the project. And I still remember that night, it was electric that when Jim Weidman called a vote on that night and council supported it, the council chambers erupted.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were, our supporters from people like TriTag and so on. But how often do you commit to an $818 million project and have a standing ovation?
Exactly. And I was just going to say, you mentioned TriTag, and that was one of the things that stands out for me was in terms of grassroots advocacy. Yeah. Those guys at TriTag were unbelievable in terms of their preparation. They were fantastic. I mean, the job that they did was top notch. It's almost like they were regional employees in planning and transportation in terms of the information they provided and the analysis that they did on everything. It was really something.
Yeah, well, a lot of them were folks out of the tech sector who live and breathe that stuff. But no, the degree of sophistication that they brought to the debate was remarkable. And I remember, Tim Mollison was one of the leads at that point in time. I remember Kate Daly, who now actually works in planning at the region. She got her PhD at
Dr.
York.
Kate Daly.
What's that?
Dr. Kate Daly.
Dr. Kate Daly, yeah. I remember this young lady sitting in the audience knitting, because Kate used to bring her knitting to counseling, and she'd be knitting, and then she'd get up, and she was brilliant. And those are the people that really took, we were just amazed at these young, bright, folks who were making this passionate case. And there were other voices in the community as well.
Well, I know, but the information they provided was so well thought out research. It wasn't just off the top of their head. I don't want to spend that kind of money and no real reason given. Like it was, even like Mike Booz and those other people, like just fantastic information. And you see it in some of the cycling advocacy you see now with Dave Truman and Emily Slofstra. Just, they do it right in terms of reasoned, balanced, informative. And I think that's what politicians want to see and hear about and hear from, right? They want that sort of information to help them make that decision.
Yeah, and they were generating things like infographics and so on, like at a time like that were really, really sophisticated. And so we were fortunate to have that group come forward, because you obviously you need friends when you make a big decision. And at that point in time, we had some really amazing.
Was there a point where you thought it was off the rails?
No, I think during the election things were a little quiet, but I think once we got through that, and then it was I think it had such a resounding support from council. I think a couple people didn't vote against it or voted against it, and I won't name names here right now, but I'm going to say Brenda Holleran's vote was a surprise to me at the time. But if anyone listens to my podcast that I did with Brenda, you come to a realization why she did. You still might not agree with it, but you come to an understanding of why she did what she did. And I understand it. And back to Jane Brewer. Jane obviously was, it wasn't going to Cambridge in the first round and all that. But I remember Jane speaking very eloquently that this was the right thing for the community, right thing for the region, and against people who, criticizing politicians in Cambridge as sort of an industry. And
my buddy Doug, it goes both ways. Hey, I mean, you got to be able to take as well as you give.
Yeah, so we got to a good place, and then we got into more work. We had to do. We had to do the bid package. We had to evaluate it. There was all kinds of work. As you know, we separated out the vehicles from the actual system. We had to do a separate agreement it was a ton of work.
Yeah. Listen, Bryan, we're not even going to get to the pandemic stuff today. But hey, it's not like COVID's going away, unfortunately and sadly. So what we'll do is early in the new year, you and I will get together and we'll touch on that, and we'll do some other shows on other things. Because like I said at the start, this is just like a casual meandering conversation about what's happened. And I can't think of anyone better who was well placed like you to know what's been going on in the past couple of decades here in Waterloo Region.
Well, and plus I've got a whole bunch of more Rob Deutschman fun facts that I didn't even use here. So
you can start your own podcast anyway.
Might do that. Alex, what are you doing afterwards? We can talk.
So this has been another edition of the Old Grey Mares podcast. I want to thank you for having listened and tagged along with us. If you want to hear from someone in the community that you think would be an excellent guest for this podcast, let me know and we will be happy to try and make that happen. And if you really like what you hear, you can subscribe and be informed of future Old Grey Mare podcasts. Thanks again. All the best.